Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the fairly recently released Batman Adventures Omnibus from DC Comics. Now this book did come out a few weeks ago now. I know it's one that a lot of people were excited about, and it seems to be already in a position where it's getting a little bit hard to find, at least from some retailers. But what I wanted to do today is take a look through this book, obviously give a summary of it, share some thoughts, having just recently read through this for the first time, having got the Omnibus. Give a kind of fresh reader's perspective in that sense. And if it is something you may be a little bit unsure of, if you may be on the fence about this one, whether or not to go for it, perhaps I can help you make up your mind one way or the other. So, what this is, for anyone who's maybe not entirely sure at this point, even though I'm sure just looking at the cover kind of gives you a good idea of what you've got here, but this is a comic series which was produced to be in the same kind of style as the very popular, influential animated series from the 90s. Now, I was a big fan of that show, way back in the day. I watched that as a kid, as I'm sure many other people did. But I never really had any awareness of this particular series of comics, until this was solicited, this omnibus. But I know it's a series that a lot of people liked, and I was definitely intrigued as a fan of that series. So I had to pick this one up myself. Just taking a look around the dust cover here. You see the image on the back. You get a little blurb of what's collected in here. But it is the full run of the Adventures series, so it's issues 1 to 36. You get a couple of annuals, holiday specials. You also get the Mad Love story in here, and an adaptation of the really kind of well-regarded film Mask of the Phantasm. The front cover of this book, I'm going to give a highlight to this, a special mention to this front cover, which they use the same image of that really classic image of Batman silhouetted against the kind of red moon. Really great stuff, one of the all-time great images of Batman. I love that. Kind of immediately makes it one of my favourite looking books in my collection before we even get to the book itself. On the book though, speaking of the actual hardcover, let's take a look at this wraparound image. So we've got straight away, you're seeing here that animated style of artwork. Everything in here is drawn to match the way that the characters look in the series. Really cool image on the actual book here, featuring a lot of the Rogues gallery. Obviously we've got characters like the Riddler, Ivy, Harley Quinn, Catwoman, Clayface, even Batgirl there sneaking into the corner. Because it's not just Batman in here, there are other members of the Bat family who show up, including obviously Batgirl, Robin's in here. Right, let's take a look inside and give a spoiler warning first of all, because I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these stories and may well show off something that you don't want to see or know about if you've never read this before. But I'm going to, not try and go into too much detail and break every story down. I never really do that, because to do so would be a pretty big task and make this a really long kind of video, and it'll already be long enough, I'm sure. On the opening page then, we do get this credits page. Now there are quite a lot of names you'll see here. The main writer throughout a lot of this in here is Kelly Puckett. The main artist is Mike Parabek. There are a couple of other kind of well-known names you'll see here. Obviously Paul Dini and Bruce Timm as co-creators of the actual animated series itself. They do come in and do a bit of work on parts of the story in here, but only really as kind of guest creators. They don't do huge chunks of the work here. So there are quite a few introductions. There's a contents page here, by the way, that does break all the issues down, all the stories. Then we get some introductions and forewords by Kelly Puckett, which I think he wrote specifically for this omnibus, which is pretty cool. And then a couple of other forewords as well. And then we jump in. So here's issue 1. This was actually the cover that they originally solicited for this omnibus. I think it's fair to say most people would agree this is better. That's just an awesome looking cover, just to say it again. So this story then, or this series I should say, what is it actually like to read through? So, and do you need to be a fan of the animated series? I guess these are key questions that I want to kind of look at and kind of touch on as I look through this book. Now, I would certainly say if you're a fan of the series, you are very likely to like this book. And if you really, for whatever reason, don't like the animated series, you don't like that style of the character designs, then you may not well like this either. Personally, I've always been a big fan of that show, and the way that a lot of those characters looked in there, Batman himself and a lot of the villains, are kind of in my mind, because I think I watched that at such a young age, still the sort of definitive designs. So the animated series look for the Joker, for Two-Face and Mr. Freeze, for example, amongst others, are kind of the first way I picture those characters in my head whenever I think of them. So to kind of discover this comic, even though I'm very late to it, I know, because this is obviously, an old series, and I'm very late coming to this party as it is, but Yeah, to sort of discover this for myself in this omnibus was a really nostalgic trip. You know, it was really good to kind of spend more time with these versions of the characters again in stories that I'd never personally read before, because these are not adaptations of the episodes, other than the exception of the adaptation of the Mask of the Phantasm story that's in here. Everything else was original content, original material and stories, but it's all kind of set around the continuity of the show. So sometimes there will be things in here that briefly mention stuff from the episodes of the series. So there's a kind of loose connection there, but for the most part, nothing in here is really strongly directly connected to any of the episodes of the show. So if you've never watched that, it's not like you'd be lost reading this. I'm very sure that's not the case. Especially for the fact that another key thing about this series is that every issue, pretty much with just a couple of exceptions, is just a one and done story. So it's very episodic. So one issue is one full story. And by the time you get to the next issue, you move on to another story. So it's very much kind of similar to the show again in that sense, in that, you know, a lot of the episodes of that show were mostly just one and done stories. There were a few obviously instances where there'd be a part one and a part two across multiple episodes. But as with that show here, again, you know, you can read an issue and get a full story. And that is such a great kind of thing to do. I think if you wanted to take a break from any longer runs that you might have been reading through, it makes this really good for that. It's also a quick read. You know, these are quite simple stories. I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's just that, you know, these are not the edgiest, darkest, most complicated Batman stories out there. Like the show, they kind of strike that balance of being accessible both to younger and older, more mature audiences. So, you know, they're not the grittiest stories, like I say. They're not the most brutal or violent or anything like that. I would say they'd be suitable for, you know, fairly young readers, but at the same time, you know, as an older reader, you can go through this and find plenty to enjoy and pick up on that maybe other people wouldn't do, you know, if you're a big Batman fan. So it's really quite an interesting book. It's possibly the most unique Batman series I've actually read in that sense, you know, because it's quite different from the mainline Batman comics, certainly, that were coming out at this time in the 90s, where it was all about Nightfall and then like eventually stuff like No Man's Land and everything just being depressing and grim all the time. These are much more, in a sense, like purer Batman stories, you know? These kind of more of a throwback to the older Batman stories of like the 60s and 70s in a way, but combining that with the more mature stuff of the present day Batman. So yeah, it's a really interesting read. And like I say, there are other characters that you see through here besides Batman. So here we get an issue with Batgirl. This is issue 12. And in terms of like continuity, where is this supposed to be taking place? This issue in this version of events is the first time Barbara Gordon ever puts on a costume and becomes Batgirl and immediately gets involved in this kind of heist situation with Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy and Catwoman all coming into it. So I say that, you know, most of the stories are individual stories, issue by issue, but there are a few kind of running plot threads that go throughout here and start to recur as the series went on. One of the main ones of those involves Ra's and Talia al Ghul. So kind of every few issues, there's a little bit of an update on a kind of larger ongoing story between those characters and Batman trying to figure out and foil Ra's al Ghul's latest scheme. There's a couple of other instances as well that I won't specifically go into, but yeah, now and then, you know, stuff from earlier issues does come up again, but largely, just to emphasize the point again, every issue pretty much wraps up its main story within that one issue itself. But the artwork, you know, got to look through here and really kind of praise that. They did a great job. Mike Parabek, as the main artist throughout the majority of this in here, did a really good job of capturing the feel of the animated series. You know, as you look through here, it's such a great kind of imitation of that show's artwork. It really captures how those characters looked and felt. This does really just feel like you're reading, you know, comic versions of that Batman and those other characters as appeared in the animated series. So like I say, you know, this is a real treat if you are a fan of that show. Just wanted to kind of go back a little bit and just show off the Two-Face here. This to me is the definitive look for Two-Face. You know, I said that the way that some of these characters were designed in the show was really, to this day, how I think of them. And Two-Face might be the best example of that. I always thought that was a great look for that character. Love how well they recreated him in this series there, you know. Good stuff, but a lot of villains get in on here, you know. So if you're just wanting to read some quick stories where you see a lot of variety of stories, a big variety of Batman's different rogues gallery, you get plenty in here as I flick through the pages. I haven't picked out many specifics, but, you know, you've probably seen the likes of Joker, Poison Ivy, Harley Quinn, Scarecrow here, Killer Croc, Mr. Freeze, Catwoman, you know, just loads of them all show up. There's a cool issue here where there's a team up with Superman, and Lex Luthor is involved in the story. That's pretty cool. That's a very entertaining issue, actually. This was yet another instance where Batman and Superman within this story are kind of meeting for the first time, or at least don't know each other very well. And yeah, it just seems that so many different stories out there where Batman and Superman meet for the first time. So this is yet another one of those. But it was very fun. Good story. Oh yeah, you get some stuff here with Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon. Cool thing there is they don't know each other's secret identities at this point. So they know each other as, you know, their civilian identities, and they know each other as Robin and Batgirl, but they don't know each other as being those two characters, if that makes sense. So that's kind of an interesting, amusing dynamic at times. Yeah, so this is just overall a really good read. Something I had a lot of fun going through. It was quite a pleasant surprise. Oh, this is a good story. This is from a holiday special, I think. You know, Mr. Freeze just cemented yet again as one of the very most tragic characters from Batman's Rogues Gallery. And that animated design, that animated series design for Mr. Freeze, you know, again, just iconic. Always really cool. Really liked it. So towards the back, you know, as the series wraps up, you know, we've seen Talia al Ghul here. You start to get to that mad love story that's collected in here. And then the Mask of the Phantasm adaptation. They're both in the back of the book. I definitely recommend this though. You know, this is about 1,200 pages in terms of, you know, build of the book quality, all that. The pages have this kind of nice, they're quite nice thick pages, definitely thicker than, you know, Marvel Omnibus pages these days. Quite glossy, but not overly glossy, you know. So as you're not getting much of a shine off them or anything like that, if that bothers you. And the binding, absolutely fine. I didn't have any issues with it myself. The only slight thing I did notice, doesn't seem to appear an issue with every cover, but on some of the covers, not the interior artwork pages, but the covers, and I don't know if this is just my book or if it's something to do with the scans of the images that they have to use not being the highest quality, but sometimes the artwork on the covers looks a little bit kind of blurry, a little bit fuzzy. Then you get into the actual pages of the issue and it's, you know, really sharp and clear. So don't quite know what that's all about, but I suspect it could be something to do with the scans of the covers. But it's not a huge issue and it doesn't seem to affect everyone. Like this one's fine, but some of them it is noticeable. You know, it's almost like you sort of, I don't know. It just looks a little bit unclear for some reason. But yeah, but then in the back of the book, because this is issue 36, so that's the final issue of the ongoing series. And then you get into Mask of the Phantasm. Now this book, well this story I should say, this film, I know that a lot of people regard that as not just being a great Batman film, not just a great animated film, but for some people I've heard plenty of people say that it's their favourite Batman film, just, you know, full stop, whether it be animated or live action. Pretty bold claim, but it is a great story, no doubt about that, and the adaptation here does a really good job of, you know, retelling it in comic form. So a really cool inclusion to have that in here. You know, for a lot of people I'm sure that may well be the highlight of the book. And then there is here the Mad Love story as well, which is, you know, again, a really kind of definitive, iconic Harley Quinn story, telling her origin as well. Only thing, as you get with a lot of DC books, you know, as you're right at the front and the back of the omnibus, they do kind of close themselves a little bit. And that is not a huge problem, really, you know, but it is something to just be a little bit aware of, I suppose. But yeah, great Harley Quinn story, Mad Love, you know, really cool to have that in here. Just a really, really good collection. Definitely recommend it. You know, if you're a Batman fan looking to pick up a new Batman omnibus, you've maybe seen people mentioning this. It was getting quite a lot of hype. For the most part, yeah, I think it is kind of worthy of that praise. Just be aware, as I say, that these are not going to be the most complex, mature, graphic stories that you're ever going to read. If you are looking specifically for just dark and grim Batman stories, this might not be the one to go for, because it is, you know, written with a younger audience in mind as well as maturer readers. In the back then, so we get some extras, different covers, variant covers by different artists. Most of these are really cool, I like a lot of them. Two-Face again, just that great Two-Face design. This one's really cool here, Ty Templeton. And this, the one they of course used from the wraparound image on the hardcover. That's by Mike Parabek and Rick Burchett, who did most of the inking for Parabek's artwork in here. Overall then, a really strong Batman omnibus, one that I was really pleased with as I read through it, and certainly something I'd be happy to hear the thoughts of others as well. So if you've read through this book, or just any of the issues at any point, let me know what you thought of it. Did you think that this was as good as the animated series? I certainly thought it was a great companion to go with that show when it would have come out at the time, although obviously I'm only discovering it now, but better late than never. But definitely a great omnibus, really cool design, on that dust jacket once again. But thanks as always for watching, that's appreciated as always. I'll be back again soon to discuss something else.